We all remember the adrenaline, the bullet-dodging choreography, the slow-motion explosions, the kind of action scenes that made your pulse spike and your jaw drop. But what if the movies that changed everything, the ones that redefined the genre, were never meant to? What if the true turning points in action cinema were flukes, accidents, afterthoughts? That's the secret nobody talks about. Studios sink hundreds of millions into formulaic safe bets, the ones they expect to dominate. But time and again, it's the small, strange, or scrappy films, the ones nobody believed in, that rip through the system and rewrite the rules. A film shot for $7,000 in Mexico? It created a new generation of indie action filmmaking. An Indonesian martial arts flick made for local audiences? It reprogrammed Hollywood's entire approach to combat scenes. A grizzled actor in his 50 seconds doing one last paycheck gig? He became the blueprint for a whole subgenre. These films didn't aim to shift the cinematic landscape. They weren't born from ambition, but from necessity, desperation, or even sheer accident. They lacked money, lacked support, and often lacked respect, and yet they sparked revolutions. In this episode, we peel back the curtain on 15 action movies that weren't supposed to matter, but somehow broke everything. Each one carries a twist, a myth, or a secret moment that set off a chain reaction far beyond the studio's expectations. So forget the blockbusters everyone told you were game changers. This is about the misfits, the rejects, the flukes, and how they accidentally became legends. Fact #, John Wick, 2014. No one expected much from John Wick, a mid-budget revenge flick starring a washed-up Keanu Reeves and directed by two first-time filmmakers whose resumes mostly involved stunt coordination. It was supposed to be forgettable, disposable. Instead, it detonated. Filmed on a tight $20 million budget, John Wick was never meant to challenge the action elite. But directors Chad Stahelski and David Leitch brought something rare: precision. They replaced shaky cam chaos with long, elegant takes. They trained Keanu in a fusion of gunplay and martial arts, so smooth it birthed a new subgenre, gunfu. The violence wasn't just brutal, it was balletic, stylized, almost mathematical. Each shot had weight, each movement had rhythm, and the world building? An underworld of assassins with its own currency, codes, and neutral zones. It felt like mythology whispered through bullet holes. The irony? Studios thought it was too weird, too cold, too clean. John Wick was quietly dumped into theaters with little fanfare, but audiences responded to its discipline, its restraint, and to Keanu's silent fury. The film grossed nearly 4 times its budget and revived Keanu's career overnight. More than that, it changed how Hollywood choreographs violence. Shaky cams and fast cuts gave way to wide shots, real-time choreography, and respect for stunt craft. John Wick didn't shout, it whispered, and that whisper became a war cry for the next generation of action cinema. And the wildest part? It was born from a dead dog and a retired hitman, a setup most execs would have tossed in the reject pile. But John Wick didn't just survive the odds, it rewrote them. Fact #2, The Raid, 2011. Imagine a film so violent, so raw, and so precise, it forced Hollywood to recalibrate how action was shot. That film came from Indonesia. The Raid, directed by Gareth Evans, wasn't supposed to be a global sensation. It was a local gamble, built around a Welsh director, an unknown cast, and a martial art few outside Southeast Asia had heard of Pencak Silat. Set in a single apartment block, the premise was minimal. A SWAT team trapped, floors of criminals above, no way out. But the execution? A revelation. Fists hit like thunder, blades flashed like poetry. The camera didn't flinch, it followed the chaos with hypnotic grace. Each fight escalated, not just in intensity, but in creativity. Hollywood wasn't just impressed, it was embarrassed. Big-budget films had bloated into CGI spectacles, relying on editing tricks to hide stunt doubles and faked hits. The Raid exposed that. Its choreography was too real, too painful, too personal. What shocked the industry even more? The actors did their own stunts. Real contact, real sweat, real risk. Suddenly, stunt realism became a badge of honor. Films like John Wick, Extraction, and Atomic Blonde owe their pacing and choreography DNA to The Raid. It wasn't made for export, it wasn't even subtitled at first, but The Raid punched through language, borders, and expectations and left a bloody footprint across the globe. And it proved something crucial. Sometimes, you don't need explosions, just a hallway, a machete, and the will to survive. Fact 3. El Mariachi, 1992. $7,000. That's how much it cost to make El Mariachi, a movie that would crash the gates of Hollywood. In 1992, Robert Rodriguez was a 3-year-old film student in Texas, with no industry connections, no permits, and no crew. What he had was a dream, a borrowed camera, and a plan to sell his low-budget Mexican action film to video rental stores. Shot in Spanish, using locals as actors, and with hand-built gear, El Mariachi wasn't supposed to be seen beyond a VHS bin in Guadalajara. But something happened. A Columbia Pictures exec found a copy, watched it, then called Rodriguez. Suddenly, the $7,000 film was in theaters across America. It became the centerpiece of a $2 million marketing campaign. Rodriguez became a poster boy for DIY filmmaking, and El Mariachi was hailed as the beginning of a new movement, indie action. The film's rough edges weren't flaws, they were flair. The limitations, single takes, improvised effects, and real locations gave it a kinetic charm that no studio polish could replicate. It inspired a generation of filmmakers that, with enough hustle, even the most impossible doors could be kicked down. Ironically, Rodriguez only made the film as a practice run. He never intended for it to be released. But El Mariachi wasn't just released, it became legend, proof that sometimes the system doesn't choose the revolution. The revolution sneaks in through the back door with a guitar case full of dynamite. Fact #4. First Blood, 1982. Before he became a symbol of American muscle, Rambo was a broken man. And First Blood wasn't meant to be an action movie. Adapted from a bleak novel about a Vietnam veteran pushed past his limit, the original cut of First Blood was a slow-burn psychological thriller. Sylvester Stallone barely spoke. The violence was restrained. The ending? Rambo committed suicide. But test audiences rejected the darkness. Studios panicked. Scenes were reshot, dialogue rewritten. The final cut softened Rambo, made him more sympathetic, and crucially, let him live. What emerged wasn't just a box office hit, it was the accidental birth of the one-man army trope. Rambo didn't have a sidekick. He didn't have a love interest. He had trauma and a body count. Audiences connected with the silent, relentless force he became. And studios took note. The sequels ditched the psychological nuance and doubled down on spectacle, explosions, guns, flags. But the original Rambo, quiet, hunted, surviving in the woods, was something else entirely. Irony twisted deeper. First Blood was a critique of war, but it launched a wave of films that glorified it. And just like that, a film meant to question violence ended up fueling a decade of it. Not because that was the plan, but because audiences chose their hero and never let go. Fact #5. Mad Max, 1979. A medical doctor from Australia decided to make a movie about societal collapse. No studio, no stars, just dust, engines, and rage. That doctor was George Miller. His film, Mad Max, shot in rural Victoria on a skeleton budget of $350,000, Mad Max looked and felt like nothing else. Its dystopian setting wasn't created with big sets or effects. It was crafted from emptiness. Barren highways, hollow towns, makeshift costumes. Mel Gibson, an unknown at the time, barely spoke. The plot was stripped to the bone. What remained was velocity, brutality, speed. But the true twist? Mad Max didn't just make money, it broke records. It became the most profitable film ever made, at the time, based on budget-to-return ratio. And it birthed an entirely new cinematic language. Its influence went global. Filmmakers from James Cameron to the Wachowskis cited it as a turning point. Video games, anime, punk fashion, all borrowed from Mad Max's scorched earth aesthetic. And the deeper irony? George Miller had no intention of launching a genre. He was processing real-life trauma working as an ER doctor, stitching up crash victims on Friday nights. He just wanted to make something primal, something fast. He ended up creating the blueprint for post-apocalyptic cinema. Not bad for a film where half the cars were borrowed from junkyards, and most of the crew had never made a movie before. Fact #6. Enter the Dragon, 1973. Before 1973, Kung Fu was still a niche curiosity outside Asia. Then Enter the Dragon arrived, and nothing was the same. Bruce Lee had already built a modest following in Hong Kong, but Hollywood saw martial arts as gimmicky, unserious something for side characters or exotic villains. Lee fought to change that. Literally, he co-produced Enter the Dragon, fought for creative control, and demanded the film center around Asian martial arts, real martial arts, no wire work, no fakery, just form, discipline, and impact. Filmed on location in Hong Kong and scored like a spy thriller, the movie blended East and West in a way that felt revolutionary. But the release came with tragedy. Bruce Lee died 6 days before Enter the Dragon premiered. His death turned the film into a phenomenon. Suddenly, it wasn't just a martial arts movie, it was a legend. Western audiences were stunned, not just by the speed and precision of the fights, but by the philosophy behind them, the discipline, the fluidity, the philosophy of be like water. Lee wasn't a stuntman. He wasn't comic relief. He was the star. And from that moment, martial arts in cinema would never again be marginalized. Enter the Dragon became the first kung fu film to receive a wide release in America, grossing over $90 million worldwide. The irony? Hollywood only approved the project because they thought it would fail quietly. Instead, it detonated a global genre and turned Bruce Lee into an immortal. Fact #7, Hard-Boiled, 1992. In a hospital filled with gangsters, a cop with 2 pistols dives through a cloud of shattered glass and never stops firing. That's hard-boiled. And if you've ever watched a shootout in slow motion, with doves flying in the background, you've seen its fingerprints. Directed by John Woo, Hard-Boiled was the culmination of Hong Kong action cinema at its most operatic. Blood danced across white walls. Enemies weren't just shot, they were choreographed into oblivion. But Woo didn't make Hard-Boiled to start a trend. He made it as a farewell. Tired of the violence being glorified, he intended this film as a swan song, his final, furious ballet of bullets. What happened instead? Hollywood watched and copied everything. The two-gun standoff, the trench coats, the slow-motion dives. Tarantino, the Wachowskis, even The Matrix's action, DNA, came straight from Woo's lens. Hard-Boiled introduced the idea that violence could be artful, that shootouts could have rhythm, that emotional stakes didn't need speeches, just a glance between reload. The irony? Woo tried to leave gunplay behind after Hard-Boiled, but America begged him to bring it with him. He did. And action movies have never looked the same since. Fact #8, Speed, 1994. A bomb on a bus. If the speed drops below 50, it explodes. That logline sounded like a joke. Even the studio thought so. Die Hard, on a bus? It felt like a parody. Small stakes, one location, a lead actor known more for surfer roles than heroics. But Speed was smarter than anyone expected. Director Jan de Bont, a cinematographer turned first-time director, insisted on realism. Practical stunts, real explosions, no green screens. And he cast Keanu Reeves not as a macho action star, but as a calm, logical, blue-collar cop. The surprise? It worked. Speed built tension minute by minute. Each obstacle sharp turns, hostage, panic, missing segments of highway was crafted with ruthless precision. And Sandra Bullock, in her breakout role, added vulnerability and humor to a genre that sorely lacked both. The twist? The studio wanted to cut the bus sequence in favor of more explosions elsewhere. They didn't believe in it, but the audience did. Speed became a box office smash, redefining what action could look like. Tight, minimal, high concept. You didn't need a skyscraper or an army, just momentum. It paved the way for the next wave of contained thrillers and proved that tension, not scale, drives adrenaline. And it elevated Keanu into the pantheon of action royalty for the first time. Little did anyone know, he'd reinvent the genre again 2 decades later. Fact #9, The Matrix, 1999. What if everything you knew was a lie? When The Matrix hit theaters in 1999, most audiences expected a cyberpunk curiosity at best. The Wachowski siblings were relatively unknown. Keanu Reeves wasn't a box office guarantee, and the pitch philosophy wrapped in kung fu, wrapped in virtual reality, sounded like a niche experiment. Instead, it became a revolution. The film fused action with metaphysics, kung fu with coding, bullets with existentialism. The Wachowskis drew inspiration from anime, Hong Kong cinema, Greek philosophy, and hacker culture, and blended it into a world that felt both ancient and futuristic. But the real innovation? Bullet time. Using an intricate rig of cameras and timing, they slowed reality to a crawl while keeping the camera in motion, creating action sequences that had never been seen before, imitated endlessly, never equaled. The irony? The studio wanted to cut most of the action scenes. They didn't understand the scripts. Executives were confused by the trench coats, sunglasses, and postmodern monologue. They greenlit it anyway, barely. The Matrix went on to earn over $460 million and reshape not just action, but entire genres. Every sci-fi or superhero film since carries its shadow. More importantly, it changed how action was perceived as something cerebral, stylish, aesthetic. philosophical, and it reminded Hollywood that an audience can handle complexity if it's delivered with enough flying kicks and slow-motion bullets. Fact Hassan Zero, Crank, 2006. A man is poisoned. If his adrenaline drops, he dies. That's not a video game. That's Crank, a movie so chaotic it feels illegal to watch. Directed by Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor, Crank starred Jason Statham in what many thought would be a forgettable, low-tier B-movie. The plot? Insane. The execution? Unhinged. But Crank embraced its madness. It wasn't trying to be polished. It weaponized chaos. Filmed with handheld cameras, skateboards, and guerrilla tactics, the directors captured action that felt out of control but was meticulously planned. The editing was manic, the logic non-existent. Statham electrocuted himself, picked fights, stole cars, all in real time. Critics didn't know what to make of it, but underground audiences loved it. Crank became a cult phenomenon, not because it was smart but because it committed, fully, unapologetically. It shattered the illusion that action needed realism, or reason, or restraint. The film spawned sequels, imitators, and a niche of hyperkinetic, nihilistic action cinema films that feel like you're watching someone OD on Red Bull with a GoPro strapped to their head. And the punchline? Statham said yes to the role as a joke. He thought it would never get released. Instead, Crank reminded the industry, sometimes the most effective action is pure, relentless chaos. Fact Hekjenein, Taka 2000. Liam Neeson was 55. He wasn't an action star. Not anymore. When Taken entered production, even Neeson thought it would go straight to DVD in Europe. The script? A simple revenge story. A former CIA agent's daughter is kidnapped in Paris. He hunts down the perpetrators. That's it. There was no franchise ambition, no world building, just a phone call and a particular set of skills. But what no one expected was the intensity Neeson brought to the role. He didn't play it like an action hero. He played it like a father, cold, efficient, focused. There were no one-liners, no slow-motion stunts, just pure, terrifying resolve. Audiences were stunned. Here was a man who looked like your accountant delivering bone-breaking justice without flinching, and they loved it. Taken made over $225 million globally. But more importantly, it created an entirely new genre, Jerry action. Older actors once seen as retired or relegated to supporting roles were suddenly back in play. Neeson, Denzel Washington, Keanu Reeves, again, and even Bob Odenkirk, nobody, followed the blueprint. The irony? Neeson didn't want to do action films. He signed on thinking it was a one-off paycheck. Instead, he became the face of a movement that changed how age was viewed in action cinema. Not because he wanted to be the next Schwarzenegger, but because he made rage look responsible. Fact Hassan 2, District B 13, 2004. What do you get when you mix dystopia, French hip-hop, and parkour? You get District B 13, a film that leapt over logic and landed in history. Produced by Luc Besson, District B 13 was a French action film set in a near-future Paris slum sealed off by the government. Crime ruled. Corruption spread. But the story wasn't the main event. The stunts were. Lead actor David Bell, co-founder of parkour, didn't use wires. No CGI, no doubles. Every rooftop jump, wall flip, and vertical escape was real. Audiences hadn't seen movement like this. It wasn't martial arts. It wasn't gymnastics. It was escape as choreography. Hollywood took notice, fast. Just a few years later, you could see the influence in Casino Royale's opening chase, Prince of Persia, The Bourne Ultimatum, and dozens of commercials, music videos, and video games. Irony struck again. District B 13 was never expected to travel beyond French theaters. It was a stylized local project, but physical truth travels faster than subtitle. District B 13 proved you didn't need superpowers or a gun to make jaws drop. You just needed gravity, defiance, and the courage to jump off a rooftop without a harness. Fact Hekjenein, Atomic Blonde 2017. Before Atomic Blonde, female-led action films came with asterisks, over-sexualized, underpowered, often gimmicky. Charlize Theron changed that in Heels, and with a broken tooth. Directed by David Leitch, co-director of John Wick, Atomic Blonde dropped a spy into Cold War Berlin and gave her a mission soaked in neon and betrayal. But what made the film unforgettable wasn't the plot, it was the pain. Theron trained for months, performed her own stunts, and demanded choreography that felt raw, real, exhausting. The result? A now legendary 10-minute stairwell fight shot to look like a single take where every punch lands, every breath is heard, and every fall feels like it bruises bone. Theron gets thrown, slammed, cut, and kicked. Not stylized, not sanitized, just survival. That scene redefined what action heroines could be. No magic, no slow-mo, just technique, willpower, and exhaustion. What's more, Theron produced the film herself. She fought to have it made her way. The irony? Studios were skeptical. Female-led action films had flopped before, but Atomic Blonde proved there was hunger for realism, grit, and brutality, delivered without apology. Theron didn't play a superhero. She played a spy who could be hurt, who bled, who killed, and in doing so, she opened the door for a new generation of action heroines who don't need to smile to be deadly. Fact Hasson 4, Deadpool, 2016. This was never supposed to happen. A fourth wall-breaking, foul-mouthed, ultra-violent superhero movie? Starring an actor whose last attempt at the same character was universally mocked? Deadpool was the kind of project studios bury, and for years, Fox did just that. Ryan Reynolds begged to make it. The script sat in limbo. Executives scoffed. Rated superhero films don't sell, they said. Then, someone leaked the test footage. Fans exploded. The internet erupted. Suddenly, the film was greenlit not because of executive vision, but because audience demand overpowered doubt. Even then, Deadpool was a risk. Shot on a modest $58 million budget, half of what most superhero films cost, with no real expectation of success. But it detonated. What made it work? Honesty, irreverence, blood, sex, self-awareness. It didn't try to be respectable, it tried to be fun, and it delivered. It shattered records for unrated opening weekend. It proved that superhero films didn't have to be PG-13 corporate machines. They could be punk, niche, personal. The twist? Reynolds spent over a decade trying to make Deadpool and no one wanted it. Now, every studio wants their own version. Without Deadpool, there's no Logan, no Joker, no willingness to explore the darker corners of the superhero myth. And it didn't happen because of a strategy. It happened because someone leaked a joke and the audience laughed loud enough to rewrite studio policy. Fact Hasson 5. The Bourne Identity, 2002. Jason Bourne didn't want to save the world. He just wanted to know who he was, and that changed everything. When The Bourne Identity was released, spy thrillers were still wearing tuxedos. James Bond had gadgets, girls, and cocktails. Action was glossy, smooth, detached. Bourne was none of that. Directed by Doug Liman, the film stripped away spectacle. Fights were handheld, messy, brutal, no slow motion, no one-liners, just quick decisions and survival instincts. Matt Damon, not exactly an action star, played Bourne like a wounded animal, smart, precise, scared. It wasn't power fantasy. It was paranoia realism. The production was a mess. Lehman clashed with the studio. Scenes were reshot. The ending changed last minute. It wasn't expected to land, but it did more than land. It recalibrated spy cinema. Suddenly, Bond looked old. Casino Royale rebooted the franchise in Bourne's image. Grittier, bloodier, more personal. Action films embraced shaky cam and close-quarter combat. Franchises from Taken to John Wick borrowed its DNA. The irony? Bourne wasn't planned as a franchise reset. It was a mid-budget thriller trying to survive internal chaos. But by the time Bourne ran through the embassy, took down a man with a pen, and disappeared into the crowd, audiences were hooked, and action cinema would never look back. So, which one broke your expectations the hardest? Was it the dog-fueled vengeance of John Wick, the rooftop mayhem of District B13, or the rage-fueled calm of a middle-aged father in Taken? Tell us which of these films rewrote the rules for you. Which one do you think was never meant to work, but somehow changed everything? And here's the bigger question. Is action cinema evolving through vision or through accidents? Drop your thoughts below, because sometimes the movies that shake us most are the ones no one saw coming.